Welcome to another video. Today is the 30th of January, and today I will be talking about Vuhledar and Bakhmut, but I will briefly mention Crimea in another video, just because there has been some stuff occurring over there that I haven't really been talking about, but I will get to that in a different video. Today I just want to give an update on the more active fronts, you could say, because this is where we're seeing more activity. So we're going to start out with Vuhledar. In Vuhledar, over the past few days, there have been some changes that I do have to address. So, first of all, yeah, the Russians were pushed out of the eastern cottages. You could look at some of the Russian maps. They're not backtracking over the original claims that the Russians in this case, had full control of the eastern dachas. It's possible that they did have control on the first day or two of the offensive. So that would have been the 24th and the 25th. Because in the beginning, they did have a lot of momentum in their attack. And so the 155th Brigade probably did have positions over there, but Ukraine was able to conduct a counterattack. And it's either that they took back all of it, or that they took back a part of it. And then the Russians were able to retain whatever part they weren't pushed out of. Or the Ukrainians pushed them out entirely, and now the Russians are trying to counterattack again. Either way, the Russians are partially in control of the dachas. They're in the southern part, closer to the garden area. This is where they're basically operating right now. But what this means is that the Ukrainians have reestablished connection over this road that leads from this coal mine. And if you zoom further out from Marinka and some other key frontline cities into Vuhledar. So this improves the situation in terms of supplies and reinforcements. Although I will say that Russia is still very close to the front line. So the Ukrainians have to be very careful when they move around with trucks in the open. Because at the moment, if you look at videos from within Vuhledar, the Ukrainians are not staying outside. They don't even want to step outside, because the second they do, they could be fired upon by Russian precision artillery or airstrikes. So this leads me to what I want to talk about now. The fact that the Ukrainians, they are heavily fortified within these buildings. Within these buildings that are constructed of these concrete slabs. And so I actually want to show a video of how it looks like. Here you can see this is the perspective of a Ukrainian soldier who's looking out of a window. You can see basically the buildings are still standing, although some of them do have damage to the balconies, and some of the parts of the concrete slab are caved in. But you can see for the most part it is standing, so the underlying base is still strong, so you could still have Ukrainian forces stationed in there with a threat that it will collapse in on itself. That shows that the building itself is also very sturdy, and you could see that this applies to all the buildings around here. I haven't seen a single building that collapsed yet. And you could see that the Russians have tried for a long time now to shell this area. You could see how many holes there are. You could see how much chaos there is on the ground. But despite that fact, the roads still look intact over here. Like, the paths could in theory still be used by some sort of equipment, whether it be a smaller infantry fighting vehicle or some towed howitzer or whatever, any sort of military equipment. It could still be moved along this road over here. Although it probably wouldn't be, because it is so close to the front line and it could be hit by the Russians. But now, what I want to get to is that the Ukrainians are mainly situated at several apartment complexes. This is one of them over here. And it's very good because it's basically set up where the entire perimeter is manned. So even if there was some sort of encirclement, then from all sides the Ukrainians would be dug in. Also, in this apartment complex, you could say there are a lot of Ukrainians. I think there would probably be less over here, because it is closer to the front line. So there are more fortifications near this road over here, and there are probably more mines and other such defensive equipment in this general area. But you could still have Ukrainian forces maybe in this apartment complex over here in this one. But they are mainly in the high-rise buildings. If they're not in the high-rise buildings, then they are situated near the northern part of the city. In this northern part, you have a lot of the public areas, so fire station, repair shop, stores, gas stations. You also have a lot of parking lots over here that could be used as air cover. So I'm going over them right now. So there probably are some Ukrainian troops over here. Maybe they are using this as a meeting point to coordinate the distribution of materials and of reinforcements. You also have an electrical substation in this area, very minor. But that's not being used for electricity, obviously. It's not operating at the moment. So what the Ukrainians are doing is they're using Starlink. There are, according to the Russian sources, 3 different Starlink terminals that they hit over the course of the fighting. The latest one that they claim to have hit was in the northern part over here, pretty close to the substation. They say that they destroyed the antenna that was used by Starlink, and this would hamper Ukraine's ability to communicate on the front line between different groups and squads. Although there probably are other Starlink terminals in Vuhledar or just around Ukraine that could be shipped in on demand. Okay, so besides the situation in Vuhledar itself, we also have the situation north of Mikilske. And I will admit that the map over here isn't entirely correct. I would change it, but I don't know how to move this polygon over here. You see this one? I've been trying to move it, but there's no option for me to change the points on here. So unfortunately, I can't actually map on the correct situation. If I was being honest, the map probably looks more like this. So the Russians don't actually have control of this entire open area that I'm crossing over here. You see this? They don't have a full control of it. Maybe they have some advanced sorties that go into here that try to harass the Ukrainian fortified positions. I don't know. But I can say for sure that they don't have a fortified position and permanent stay in this area. They're mainly stationed around Volodymyrivka and Mikilske, and whenever they try to advance towards these open fields, they're getting heavily fired upon by Ukrainian artillery and by small drones. You have Ukrainians dug in, especially over here. You see I mapped out a certain location where they have a lot of trenches, and they do have probably now more since the satellite imagery on Google Maps has been uploaded. You can see here all around the road they probably have defenses that are connected to Vodiane. And so that's complicating the situation over here. But the Russians were able to advance north of Mikilske, and they have solidified control over these heights that I'm circling. So these heights are not that high in elevation, but relative to Mikilske, for instance, or relative to southern Vuhledar, not northern Vuhledar, but southern Vuhledar, and also Pavlivka, it is on that sort of high elevation. So having control over here is good if the Russians want to fire mortars onto the Ukrainian positions in Vuhledar or just to the north of it as supplies are coming in. This also gives them the opportunity to try to attack this coal mine over here. This coal mine is still under Ukrainian control. I've seen videos recently of some Ukrainian troops passing by over here, so I know for sure that position set up over here. So those need to be dislodged if the Russians want to get full control of Vuhledar, because even if Vuhledar falls, we're still going to have this very fortified garrison just to the northeast. So that also has to be dealt with. Okay, moving on to the situation in Bakhmut. In Bakhmut, we have the Russians continuing to push towards Ivanivske. Since my last map update, the Russians have been applying more pressure. I don't want to make any definitive map changes just yet, but I can say that the Russians have been putting more pressure in this area, and they are advancing along these open fields, something that hadn't been happening before. Also, they're advancing in the direction of this town called Stupochki, which is across the water canal. So you have Russian troops expanding their zone of control along this mine over here. Although I will say, again, this is very slow progress, and a lot of the time these assaults are repelled, but it's in the direction of this town. Same thing with Ivanivske. The Ukrainians are putting up a good defense over here. You have the 116th Territorial Defense Brigade, which is from Poltava originally. They are putting up a defense over here. I've seen some Russian sources claim that the 3rd Battalion of this brigade is on immunity. I don't know if this is true. It's possible that it is. There might be a video that was even released, but maybe it's not the entire battalion. Maybe it's just a certain group. Either way, I know that this unit is stationed in this general area. Now, another place where there's been some changes is around the Zabakhmutka district. I think generally the district encompasses all this area over here. So before, the front line looked like this, basically. It was basically running around Rostovka Street and sort of connecting to Persotravnivry Street, and then to the south to this street over here, Fedora Maximenka Street. But since then, the Wagner Group has been able to make some incremental advances, albeit in a very slow pace, where they've been taking over block by block. So it's just house fighting at this point. I've seen sources that are from the Wagner Group and also from the DPR claim that the Russians have been able to reach this street over here called Shchedera Street, hard to pronounce, which is over here. So that would be actually a pretty substantial advance, and it would mean that over the past few days, the Wagner Group has been able to take over most of the Bakhmutka district. And it would also mean that if there were any new units that were still stationed to the south of the street, Shchedera Street, like in this area over here in the parking lot, or in this extension of the waste sorting plant, then they would be in danger of being cut off. So they would have to also retreat. So I don't know. There's no footage of this that can confirm it, which is why I'm not putting the map over there. But just know that it's a possibility and that in the future Russia could reach the area. If they do, though, then it will be very hard to cross over the Bakhmut-Tovka River, not because of the river itself, but because of the low elevation in the area and the fact that the fields around the river are open and the Ukrainians across the river are in high-rise buildings, so they're going to be able to easily fire upon the crossing Wagner Group soldiers. To the north, really nothing happened. I just showed that the entire forested area over here is fully under Russian control, but Ukraine still holds on to the rest of Miaskombinat district. Over here, the Wagner Group has been launching attack after attack in the direction of Parsokivka, and Ukraine is still holding the line over here. They are conducting troop rotations. I think the 4th Brigade was just moved in, so I'm going to have to map them on into the area of Krasnohora. I think it's a territorial defense unit, if I'm not mistaken. So you are seeing how Ukraine is putting a lot of emphasis on holding onto this town. There's a lot of resupply going on right now, and that's complicating the Russian advance. Same thing going on over here to the north. You have these Ukrainian drone units that are preventing the Russian advance. Like, look at this, Birds of Magyar, that's one. There's a Scala Battalion and 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade. A bunch of these, they just have these pretty cheap drones, but they have been pretty effective in the course of the battle, and I'm going to get into that later on in the video. But also, in Vuhledar, the Russians have basically took full control of the town, like I said before, and they've expanded their zone of control all the way up to the defensive fortifications that were set up over here. So it is possible the Russians will begin assaulting it or begin flanking it in the next coming days. If that's the case, then the Ukrainians will just have to move back to some other heights over here. There could be heights, but I would say that this is a lower elevation area. This ridge in between Vasyukivka and Zalizhnyanske, so the Ukrainians may have to retreat to one of these two towns. Then to the north, the Russian forces have been trying to advance onto Rozdolivka, and they've been rebuffed each time by the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, and specifically the 109th Battalion of the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade. This unit, again, using these cheap drones. Whenever the Russians come out of their dugouts or their trenches and try to advance, sometimes along the road with their equipment, they're being fired upon by the Ukrainian drone crews. And these drones, their footage is being published to everyone. So we can see how it is very dangerous in this general area over here where the Russians try to advance. Each time they've been rebuffed as of now. But in Mykolaiivka, it's basically a gray zone right now. You see how it's pretty close to the Bakhmutovka River. The Ukrainians are probably not holding on to it anymore. We haven't seen any footage of Ukrainian presence over here or of any Russian presence over here. But we do know for sure that Ukraine has full control of Rozdolivka. Mykolaiivka may be a gray zone by now. So that's all for the situation around Bakhmut and Vuhledar. So thank you guys for watching.